Hi, I'm Ray Salisbury. I'm here with Alastair McDowell. In late 2021, he and a friend climbed the 24 highest hills in New Zealand in 1 month. It's an incredible achievement. Alastair, how did it all begin? Tell me about your younger years growing up in Auckland.
Well, yeah, I grew up in Auckland, so quite far away from the big mountains in the South Island. Our family would only just go camping in the beach. So it wasn't until high school that my father said you should do the Duke of Edinburgh program. And I vividly remember that first tramp in the Waitakere Ranges, going up a muddy hill, and I realised, wow, I can do this. And it was just that contrast of tramping and the freedom compared to the stress and the competition of normal sports. I thought, this is where I want to go, into the outdoors. And then eventually that became into the mountains.
Okay, backtracking a bit, what tertiary education do you have? And what job do you do now?
So I did engineering at University of Auckland, and then I moved to Canterbury University to do Masters in Engineering. And now I work as an engineering consultant on solar and heat pumps.
Alastair, you are now 30 years old. Can you fill us in on your previous alpine climbing experience in Aotearoa and overseas?
Yeah, so once I finished university, I started doing more technical mountaineering in New Zealand. Started mainly in the Remarkables, learning the technical skills, and I had a few epics trying to do things that were too hard for me, and Mount Hutton and Aoraki Mount Cook. Had a few big adventures there, and then soon after I joined the New Zealand Alpine Team, and that's where I learned a lot of the technical skills. I got some good mentoring. I went to Canada and learned how to ice climb for a season, and then to Yosemite for a month of big wall climbing. And I was living in Australia at this time. I was also learning how to rock climb, and every few months I would go overseas to a place like Patagonia, did an expedition to Peru. I was just really addicted to going overseas for these big adventures. And eventually, after many years, I came back to New Zealand and thought I should do some bigger expeditions here in New Zealand, especially as the COVID pandemic arrived.
Yeah. And who were your mountaineering heroes?
I think Graham Dingle's book, Two Against the Alps, was what inspired me to get into the South Island and do a big transalpine traverse like he and Jill Tremaine did.
Yeah.
That was quite formative. I did a 33-day trip from Arthur's Pass to Aoraki Mount Cook. But after that, I wanted to do more mountaineering. I saw the higher peaks, the 3,000 metre peaks, and I was inspired by people like Bill Deans, who are these formidable characters in the 70s and 80s, how they just went off and did these crazy climbs solo. But I always wanted to go with a partner. People like that in New Zealand history inspired me the most.
Now tell me about the New Zealand Alpine Team. How did you get into it? And I'm aware some of your colleagues in the team perished, and did that make you a lot more cautious?
Yeah, so the New Zealand Alpine Team, it's a mentoring program, and every 3 years they accept 4 or 6 young climbers, 18 to 25, and you get mentored one-on-one by some of the most experienced alpine climbers in New Zealand and Australia. So I learned a lot of good skills, how to be safe in the mountains, but unfortunately 2 of my friends did die climbing while on the program, and it's unfortunate, but it's the reality of mountaineering that it's dangerous. And sometimes just the smallest mistake can catch you out.
Yeah.
So it did make me more cautious. You have to be so careful every time you set out of the hills, and I'd always make sure that I was doing things within my abilities when possible.
So what or who inspired you to climb all of New Zealand's 24 highest 3,000 metre peaks all in one sustained singular push?
Well, when I came back to New Zealand in 2019 after the time overseas, I started going out with Gavin Lang, who was doing the Seeking the Light project. He was photographing all of the 3,000ers. At the time, it's funny because I thought they're not that interesting. You know, they're all sort of the same snowy peaks. So it wasn't on my radar at that point. But then a year later, Penny Webster, she talked to me at a NZAC club night and suggested that I try and do this sort of link-up in a continuous style like Uli Steck did in the European Alps.
Right.
Something purely with human power. And that idea got wedged into my brain, and when I looked at the map, I started to think, and I talked to friends, how would you link all of these peaks up in a continuous fashion? And once I realized what the route could be, then I realized, now this is actually a cool adventure that I could put some effort in.
Okay, on your audacious expedition, who was your climbing partner? Did you have any conflict between you?
So when I thought about this trip, who would come with me, I needed someone who was really fit, had a really good attitude, someone who I could work with. And I thought of my friend Hamish Fleming, who is an adventure racer, multi-sport racer in Queenstown. But in recent years, he's turned into more of an all-round adventurer, taking on mountaineering and paragliding, backcountry skiing. And I thought this would be a good trip for him because he wanted to improve his mountaineering. And the technical difficulty of these peaks is not extreme, so it was suitable for him. And I think because he had this adventure racing background, he was used to suffering. So he enjoyed, the long days, the early starts, midnight starts. And because he had never climbed any of these peaks before, he was always really enthusiastic about the challenge, and he was eager to learn. So I think because we had this dynamic where I was the leader, he was the follower, it never led to conflict, which worked quite well in this case.
Cool, so it was a big suffer fest for how many days?
Ended up being 31 days. We had 34 days available. Hamish had to get back to work and he had a wedding, so we had a fixed amount of time. We ended up finishing 3 days early, just under 1 month.
So from Aotearoa to Aspiring, it took 31 days to climb the 24 highest peaks.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. Right, Alastair, you are known for your super lightweight travel in the backcountry. Tell me, what mountaineering equipment did you guys carry?
Yeah, it's really important to go lightweight when you're in the mountains, but not too light. So it's always a balancing act. We did take a shelter, a two-person single-skin tent. We took PLB and an inReach so that we could communicate in case of emergency. We had 12-point crampons and 2 ice axes each. We used a 60-metre rope, 8.1 millimetre thick. We had harnesses, helmets, headlamps, 4 layers of clothing with big down jackets. We had quite light sleeping bags, only about 400 grams each. Thin foam mats for sleeping. We had a jet boil cooker for making our meals, which were mainly Radix dehydrated meals. We had 8 ice screws and cams and nuts, carabiners and slings for the climbing sections. And we fit it all into 40-litre packs. And we were able to do that because we had food drops in 5 of the huts, so we only had to carry 2 or 3 days of food at any one time.
Okay, readers of your story might get the false impression that you two were racing through the mountains, bagging peaks here and there at a frenetic pace. Now, what was the real story?
Well, I mean, we did have to move fast to get all these peaks done, but the reality is that there's a lot of storms in November and December. It's quite unsettled. We couldn't go later in the summer because all the glaciers would be wrecked by the heat and the sun and the rain. So we had to contend with these storms. So that would mean we'd go hard for 2 or 3 days, sometimes 4 days, and then we'd get hit by a storm. So we'd be stopped in a hut for 3 days. But while we were moving, the days were long, maybe 16 to 20 hours each day. It wasn't about moving fast, it was just about keeping going. So real sense of endurance was required. We had to eat and look after ourselves, drink a lot, you get dehydrated, and often endure only 4 or 6 hours of sleep.
4 to 6 hours of sleep, and then up to 19 hours on the go.
Again,
And the next day, and the next day.
But then you'd have 3 days to recover.
Right. And so was it frustrating when you climbed your first mountain, Mount Sefton, from the Copland Valley, and then you were stuck in Douglas Rock Hut for 3 interminable days where the rivers were flooding and you couldn't get across the Copland River? How did you feel in that first 3 days imprisoned in a hut?
Yeah, we'd only been moving for 2 days and then we were stuck there. It required a lot of patience. We were quite glad for at least the first period that we'd got this one peak on the board, but you start to extrapolate after a few days, man, this is a long expedition. Am I really cut out for this? Because you're still used to being in that rush and hustle of the city. You're still transitioning. It takes about a week before you transition to mountain time where you have to wait, you have to be patient. And I think that's something we learned quite strongly in that first week. You have to accept and embrace whatever the conditions throw at you and just wait until they're ready.
Readers of your story or watchers of your video will see you did succeed and climb be the first pair of climbers to knock off those 3,000 as in the quickest time, 31 days. But how critical was meticulous planning to your success compared to the lucky weather you got?
Yeah, we did do a lot of thought about the route, and we visualized all these backup options, places we could go if the weather came in at the wrong time. We had enough connections to know things like a secret route through the Copland Valley from the Copland River, which would have otherwise been awful bushbashing.
Yeah. So did you get the weather in the right places?
It's hard to know how much is luck and how much of it was being adaptable, but it did seem in hindsight that we got short weather windows at the start, which allowed us to rest and attune ourselves to this type of trip. And then we got longer weather windows near the end where we were fitter, but we were also more tired.
Right.
We just had to take whatever came.
Yeah. And so later on, when you got stuck in Empress Hut for 3 interminable days, what did you do then?
At the time, it wasn't interminable because we were quite tired. And we also met 4 climbers, 2 of them guides, Jane, Morris, Anna Keeling, Nigel and Linda.
Yeah.
They were about to do the Grand Traverse of Aoraki, Mount Cook, which would have been a great trip.
Did they do it?
No, they got turned around by hard ice on the summit and wind. But we had a really good social time there, and we just had yarns for 3 days in the hut while waiting for the weather to improve.
So was that one of the highlights?
Yeah, it was, because for the rest of the trip, it was just me and Hamish, which was nice.
So what was your ethos in walking from virtually sea level, to the top of New Zealand and back down, and then cycling for us? Was it 60-something Ks all the way to Mount Aspiring? Oh.
Yeah, 280 kilometres.
280 Ks.
From Bull Road to Aspiring Hut is where the mountain biking ended.
You did road cycling, then mountain biking, instead of just taking the easy option of combustion engine powered car. Well, why?
Well, it was a little arbitrary because we actually had a friend meet us at Bull Road in Mount Cook Village and drive next to us, so we could have easily jumped in. So it wasn't about logistics. That was actually harder, setting up the bikes. It was more about connecting all of the mountains by human power under human steam. And so when we were standing on top of Tititea Aspiring, we could look across, we could see Aoraki Mount Cook and Tasman right there, and know that we had travelled that whole distance using our own bodies.
Right.
And we'd connected these mountains together, and it feels a lot more pure. And we had a bit of a dilemma near the end. Do we take the bike if there's not enough time and good weather?
Yeah.
What would go first, the biking or the mountain?
And you rolled the dice. What did you do?
We did. The weather looked completely unsettled, quite dubious in those last few days, and it was a real push. We had to get from Mount Cook Village at Friday night to the summit of Aspiring by Sunday night before a storm came in.
Right.
And that added to the excitement of the trip for sure.
Well, Alastair, pulling off a 24-peak challenge was an incredible feat of endurance, and it's attracted a lot of attention. So how do you cope with the public's adulation?
It has been quite overwhelming how much interest there's been. I didn't expect any of it, to be honest. The day after we finished, we were set up with an interview with the NZ Herald. And I didn't expect it to be such interest to the public. But I think it's because, they're the highest peaks. There's also the 14 peaks in the Himalayas on Netflix that was in the public perception. So doing something in New Zealand, I think, caught their attention in a similar way. And it has felt hard to control that sense of ego that comes when people are constantly praising you for some adventure that you've done. Sometimes you feel like imposter syndrome because there's other better climbers out there.
Yeah.
They just haven't done something as public as this. But I think it's an opportunity to share the New Zealand mountains with other people and try and encourage them to see these wild places.
Yeah.
promote New Zealand mountains on the world stage, and try and find ways to encourage people through this adventure.
Great. Hey, thanks for sharing your philosophy and your experience with me. I'm sure everyone will be really interested and start following you. I'll leave some links below the video, and they can read more and see your movie. What's the movie called?
It's called ENCHAINMENT. It's coming out now.
Great. Okay, cheers.
Thanks, Ray.